Hi, everyone. Welcome to Radiant Living, Inspiring Humanity to Thrive. This is Marisa B, and today I'd like to welcome Molly Remer. Molly is a priestess, mystic, poet. She lives in central Missouri with her husband and children, and together with her husband, Mark, they run Brigid's Grove. Molly is the author of at least 11 books, articles, and runs women's circles, gatherings, and celebrations. Hi, Molly. Thank you so much for coming today.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you got involved? I know that you run a 365 Days of Goddess group, and you also do a 30 Days of Goddess group, which I myself have gone through, which was wonderful. And I wanted to know a little bit about how you got involved with all of this.
Yes, thank you so much. And I would like to go ahead. I'd like to go ahead and start. As Marissa already knows, we had a little bit of a bumpy start to our interview with some technological challenges, but it made me think about how many times in our lives we're invited to come back. We're invited to return over and over again. We all have bumps. We all have unexpected twists in the road, and we're always invited to return. And so I'd love to start today, before I talk about myself, I'd love to start today with a reading from 365 Days of Goddess.
Oh, so wonderful.
I have a program that I call 30 Days of Goddess, which really is it's kind of a shorthand metaphor for daily practice, for having a daily committed practice on your spiritual path. And so that's 30 Days of Goddess. And then from that experience, I started that in 2021, and I thought it was going to last for 30 days. And now here we are coming up on 1,000 days of continuous practice. And out of that practice came this book, 365 Days of Goddess. And so today I opened to the reading for this. The book is organized as a reading for every day of the year. And I opened to the reading for today, and I thought, let's start with that. Let's come back. Let's recenter into our bodies and our breaths and into this moment, and start with a reading from that book. And then I'll talk a little bit more about other things. But inviting you and anyone who is listening to take a deep breath and let yourself come back in. We're always invited to return. I marvel at how many times we're invited to begin again in an ordinary day. So here we go, coming back in, taking a deep breath, centering ourselves in where and who we are right now. And then here's the reading. There is grace even here in the hollow and aching times. There is the sweet kiss of the wind, the steady radiance of the sun, the solid earth beneath our feet. There are rivers running faithfully to the sea. There are flowers in bloom and bees at work, and trees leaning in to touch thin fingers to their neighbors. There are wild petunias, pale purple and open-throated. There are goldfinches and indigo buntings watching from the sumac bushes, and a gray feather on the stones. There is a white moon and broad, soft leaves of mullein. There is a rising and falling in your chest. And there are waves that crest and slide into distant shores. There are people to love and chains to break. There is change to make and a life to weave from what you can. Reach out to those threads of grace. Hold on.
Beautiful. Thank
you. Sorry.
No, that's okay. That was absolutely lovely. Of course, I know you're a poet, so it was just beautiful.
Well, I do find it really helps to recenter and to remember that we can cross that threshold, back into our own hearts whenever we feel. One of the things I tell people with 30 Days of Goddess is when you feel a sensation of longing inside of yourself, when you feel the wish, I wish there was more magic in my life. I wish I was experiencing the sacred right now. I wish I had a practice that sustains me. That's your doorway right there. That sense of longing, that sense of desire, that sense of a call from within. That's your doorway. You're invited to cross the threshold in that exact moment. The longing itself is the doorway. And so I'm just, like I said, I marvel at how often we're invited to return in an average day. Ordinary world.
Yes, that it's true. And with technology, it happens all the time. So
yes,
since I'm a little bit technologically challenged, I just go with the flow because that's how it goes. You can't sweat it. But I wanted you to tell us a little bit about how you actually got involved with this. I mean, we had spoken, of course, and I know that you have a master's in social work, and I know you have a doctorate in divinity, and I know that that goes hand in hand with your practice and doing the 30 days of goddess actually, and looking to jump into the 365 days, because I did the 30-day goddess probably about 2 months ago, and I so enjoyed it. So I thought I would start with the 365 days, and take one day at a time, more or less.
Yes, absolutely. That's one of the things I also like to remind people is, so now, as I said, I'm approaching this 1,000 days of continuous practice, and I'm like, but each day happens moment by moment, piece by piece, step by step, breath by breath. It's not something that happens, boom, 1,000 days at a time. And so one of the things I love to share with people is you can start anytime, anywhere, as small and simple as you want to make it. Like, the door is always open. So today can be your day one, totally fine. It can be somebody else's day 1,000, totally fine. Each person is welcome. So yes, to start with, so my own background is I was raised in what I consider to be a non-religious household. And though my mom had a group of friends, a circle of friends who would hold mother blessing ceremonies for one another when they were pregnant. So the seed of my own spiritual path really was planted when I was a kid, attending those ceremonies with my mom and seeing how the women would gather around one another, how they would sing to each other, how they would wash each other's feet, how they would adorn their heads with flowers, how they would celebrate this power, the power in themselves, but also the power of their connections to one another. And that was my first exposure to like what I would consider to be, ritual, ceremony, sacred living. And it was so beautiful. It really caught my heart. It caught my eye. It caught my interest. And it planted a seed or fed something in me from that early kind of age. But then we were not religious. We didn't go to church. We didn't have a faith background. I did grow up in Central Missouri, which is in the Bible Belt, and it was very religious. Lots of fundamentalist people around me, so that like formed. In some ways, I feel like a lot of my work in the present day is rooted in almost like an offering of repair to the damage and the wounds that I witnessed from the outside. So I wasn't part of that framework, but as an outside observer, I saw how much wounding there was and how much damage was caused by a fundamentalist outlook. And so I feel like a lot of my work even today is rooted in an offering of healing and restoration for that wounding. And I just was saying the other day to my Patreon community that from my perspective, like I hope your spiritual path, I hope your religious framework, I hope it smells good, tastes sweet, and holds you kindly. Like no matter where you come from, your spirituality, I hope it smells good, tastes sweet, and holds you kindly. I hope it doesn't tell you that you're irredeemably flawed and that you're, full of sin and all that kind of stuff. I hope it holds you kindly. And so a lot of my work arose from like a counter offering, so to speak, to that type of framework. And so I do have the master's degree in social work, which I feel like goes kind of hand in hand with feminism and kind of a social justice outlook and things like that. But in my earlier years, I was more curious about different types of spirituality from an academic perspective. And it was after I had my first children. I have 4 kids, and there's an age gap between them, but I had my first baby, and we carried on that mother blessing tradition into my group of friends that I'd learned from my own mom. We sing the same songs. We carried over some of those same traditions. And then when my second son was 2, I went to a Cakes for the Queen of Heaven training in St. Louis with the UU Women in Religion Committee or the foundation. And they offer this Cakes for the Queen of Heaven training, which is kind of an in-depth look at like a feminist history of religion. What would the world be like, or what would your life have been like if you grew up in a world where the divine was viewed as female or feminine? What if we saw the goddess in the world, and how would life change? So that's the core question of Cakes for the Queen of Heaven. And when I went to that training and I sat there in the room and we were draped in silks and we had the candles and all this kind of stuff, and I thought, like, this is it. Like, this is the door. This is something. There's something here, and I'm being invited in. And this is what there is for me out here beyond like pregnancy, birth, and motherhood. One of the things I had said, I tapped into a lot of my own like power and strength in pregnancy and childbirth. But then I started to think like, well, you can't just be pregnant and have babies all the time. Like, what else is there? Like, this is not the only experience of womanhood. This is not the only experience of power and magic and sacredness that's allowed to women. Like, nobody has to be pregnant in order to celebrate and to sing and to circle and to have flowers on your head. Like, we can do that all the time. Nobody has to be pregnant at all. So that was like a profound realization to me. Like, we can invite this into our lives all day, every day of the year. It doesn't have to be reserved only for a special stage of life or a specific experience. And so that Cakes for the Queen of Heaven training, really, that cracked open, for me, it cracked open the door into priestessing. And as a priestessing as a vocational path, priestessing as a purpose, priestessing as like a mission. And it let me see that we could celebrate this full range of life experiences, this full spectrum of sacred living in so many ways, for so many reasons and so many purposes. And it doesn't have to be reserved only for a slice. So I still have a special place in my heart for pregnancy, birth, and mothering, but I'm like, there's so much more. And there's so many things in so many people's lives. There's all kinds of life transitions and all kinds of things to honor, even, getting a new house, or we've had rituals for women who are getting divorced and crossing the threshold into that transition. We've had rituals for people who have had to have ovarian surgery and who've lost their ovaries. We've had miscarriage rituals. We've had grief rituals. And then we've also just had celebration rituals. Here we are together on this day on this earth. Isn't it awesome? Like, we can just celebrate where we are with who we're with. And so that Cakes training really like kind of opened the door to priestessing for me, but still from kind of like an academic or a theoretical perspective, like an ideal perspective. That was way back in 2008, I believe. And so a little bit after that, I started to hold rituals and ceremonies for people in my area. And I thought, I can do this too. Like, I can drape people in silk, and we can sing, and we can light the candles, and we can do this. And so I started to hold circles for people in my area in a quarterly retreat basis. So we'd have a summer retreat, a fall retreat, etc. And then I thought, again, each step I'm invited on, I'm thinking like, but I want to take this a little farther. Like, I want more of this. And so I started at a seminary, and I earned a master's in divinity there. And then I went on for a doctorate of ministry. And I wrote my thesis or my dissertation on practical priestessing, on contemporary priestessing in the US. Like, what does it look like? Who are the people out here who are doing this from this vocational perspective rather than archetypal perspective? Because we see in there's lovely oracle cards, or there's beautiful resources that kind of approach priestessing from like an archetypal perspective, almost an idealized image. Like, she's rolling in the rose petals, she's all she's got crescent moons glowing on her brow. That's amazing. I was coming from the vocational perspective of, she's also the one who's scraping the wax off the floor after everybody leaves. Like, so how is this work looking? How is this work of priestessing in a community working? How are we bringing this forward? What does it look like in practice, as opposed to just an ideal? Because the ideal is really lovely, and in reality, like, whatever, bugs bite you, people laugh when you don't want them to, like, whatever. It's not as beautiful as it looks in the books. And so my dissertation research was really based on that. Like, what does this really look like in practice for people? So I wrote that dissertation on priestessing, and I had expanded my practice into different things that I'd offer, and I was doing more. I was leading more rituals and more circles, and extending my work out. And I finished that degree, I guess, in 2014 or 2015, and it was then. So then I had this sensation of, this is great, like all this information and all this knowing and all these skills and the facilitation skills. And, I took classes in, death and dying, and like, ritual transitions, and working with ethics. And, I took all kinds of classes about like kind of the nuts and bolts, so to speak. And I remember with just clarity, like sitting there thinking, I was sitting at my altar, like looking out the window, and I had an amethyst in one hand and a little goddess in the other hand. And I was looking out the window and it was dusty and hot. And I thought, like, I would love to feel this sense of like connection, this sacred connection. I would love to feel this every day. Like, I want to feel this every day. I don't want it now. So now, instead of just being reserved for the pregnancy and birth, then I moved it into, we can have celebrations 4 times a year. Then I moved it into, we can have a red tent every month. Mm-hmm. Then I was like, how do I feel this every day? Like, how do I feel this stepping into the sacred every day? Not just once a month for red tent, or not just for our summer solstice ritual. Where's the daily connection? So I sat there, like, looking at the dusty yard and holding my amethyst and thinking, like, where is this every day? And I started what I call the woods priestess practice, in which I decided I was going to go down to the woods. I'm lucky enough to have a lovely forest and woods with big, huge rocks in them. And I thought, I'm going to go down to this place in the woods, and I'm going to go here every day for a year. And I'm just going to see what I can learn from the same exact piece of ground. I'm going to see what these stones, these trees, this sky, what does this life have to teach me? What does this life have to teach me right here, right now? And so I called that my woods priestess practice, which was essentially checking in at the exact same place every day and seeing what changed. And what I discovered was I kept that up. I had to miss a couple of days. My grandma died that year and I had to go to California. And so I did miss a couple of days, but I took a rock to my grandma's funeral from the woods. So I still had a little connection there. And so I spent 335 days on that same rock. And every day was different. And every day I learned something. And every day something magical. And every day I experienced something powerful. And every day there was something. And I wrote a lot of poems during that time. I wrote my most of the Womanrunes book, which is a divination system. Womanrunes is a divination system. And I wrote most of that book down there in the woods. I would listen and make a recording of what I was thinking or hearing or seeing. And then I would come back and type up what I had recorded on the audio. And so that woods priestess practice was very illuminating and very expanding. And it was very much about taking the longing and putting it into practice, taking the longing and making it real. Like, I want to see if I am wishing to live a magical and sacred and connected life, like, let's bring it into the forefront. Let's bring it here and make it a priority, and not just save it for special occasions or perfect. Let's not save it for perfect. Let's do it every day. And during that woods priestess practice, I was very much, I wouldn't always prioritize it in the morning. So sometimes I would have to run out there in the dark, it'd be almost dark, and I'd be thinking, I haven't sat on my rock today. And I'd like scurry out there in the darkness. But that has its own gifts. The moon, the sun is setting, the moon is there. There'd be some strange night noises. There's still something to explore. But that was my first experience with, like, committing to daily practice, to committing to showing up for my own life. And that's where I learned that when we show up in our own lives, the sacred shows up too. Like, when we accept the invitation to be in connection, the sacred shows up too. The goddess shows up too. Our connection shows up too. It's part of keeping that promise to ourselves. So that was really the seed, the root of it. And I kept up a daily practice in many ways. So that was in 2013. And I kept up a daily practice in many ways after that, but it wasn't necessarily, again, like, not a priority, or it was a priority, but it would get pushed aside. Something else is happening. The kids need me, whatever. It would get kind of pushed aside, and it would happen in the night or in the evening. And so when I was turned 40, I was writing, I was really feeling at the cusp of change, like, I need my life. Again, I keep using the doorway metaphor, but there's, like, a lot of doorways. There's a lot of doorways in an everyday life. And I was turning 40, and I was feeling kind of dusty and a little stale and crumbled, and a little bit like, I want to go on this spiritual quest. I want to, like, have something happen, but I don't want to run away and leave my family. I want to do eat, pray, love, but without, like, abandoning everybody. And so that year I started on this journey with Persephone. I wrote Walking with Persephone about that unfolding journey of how do we like claim our own magic? How do we rebuild our souls? How do we build practices that sustain and nurture us without abandoning everything and running away? Like, how do we bring magical, enchanted, sacred living into the center of our lives instead of saving it for the margins? And during the writing of that book, I really reprioritized devotional practice. So I hadn't really stopped from 2013 up to that year, but I reprioritized it as in the center. I talk about self-priestessing. So we priestess to the community. We are of service, but we also priestess to ourselves from a place of self-priestessing, where we like create and nurture what we need so that we have something to even give to other people. Mm-hmm. And so during that Walking with Persephone journey, I really like centralized devotional practice, like back into the center, back into the heart. And it was from that experience that I continued to explore ways of sharing with other people. I wrote the Goddess Devotional, which is my little pink book. Mm-hmm. I wrote the Goddess Devotional during that time. And then I wrote Whole and Holy, which is another Goddess Devotional. And, but it was all about like helping people create and nurture and sustain like spiritual practices that actually fit their lives. And then in 2020, we all know how 2020 was pretty wild for people. And in 2020, it really became important to me to create something that I could like reach out digitally to share with people, to offer them some kind of inspiration or hope and encouragement. And I woke up one morning, shortly before the winter solstice, and I had this sudden, like, I called it a goddess lightning strike of inspiration. I had this goddess lightning strike of inspiration that was 30 Days of Goddess. It like dropped into my lap. I was like, well, I'll have these words. I'll encourage this simple daily practice. We'll have a little book we can fill out. And I thought, cool, like this sounds great. I ran down to the woods to my own classic spot on the rocks. I wrote down the words. I came back. I created a little book, and I thought this will be amazing. We'll do this 30-day practice in creating small, simple devotional practices that actually fit your life and that help you show up for yourself and help you discover that when you show up for yourself, the sacred shows up too. And so I did that. And as I said at the beginning, I thought I was doing it for 30 days. And then here we are 1,000 days later, and I'm still doing it. So that is the spiral path as it has unfolded for me over the period of really approximately 20 years of dancing with the spirit and dancing with the sacred.
Well, I found it fascinating because, as I said, I did the 30 days of God, yes. But I like the idea of bringing it in every day. And I think the whole system, I've studied. It's not that that's where my expertise is or my degrees are, but I've studied a lot of comparative religion, and I found that oftentimes a lot of religions had taken away from the people,
yes,
their parts in it, and so it's really no longer participatory. And and I think that in today's day and age, that's what people were yearning for, to be more involved. And so whatever path you follow, I think that if you're more involved in that path and on a daily basis, I think that like you said, it invites the spirituality in. It comes in with you. It's not just you looking for it on the outside, but you've invited it in. And in fact, it does come in. And so I really enjoyed the program. And that's why I said that I was looking into the 365 days. And I like that it's open to not just, what would we say, physically worshiping the goddess. You don't enforce that with people that are just looking. That's what I liked about it there. If someone's just looking to bring that devotion into their life, it's not necessarily that you have to follow these particular rules. These, right. Learn all these goddesses, or these goddesses must be used, or you have to follow this particular path of goddesses. It was not that way. It was more an invitation to begin to experience it in your life, more or less.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. That is what I hope to offer to people, is that you can incorporate so many things in so many ways, and that it kind of lives in you like this. It lives in you. And it really came from when I was talking about the goddess lightning strike of waking up on before the solstice. That was in response to, I'd been asked so many times over the years, like, I'm interested in this, but how do I do it? Like, how do I do it? And I think back to that day in 2013 where I was sitting with my amethyst, and that was probably 2012, but I was sitting there with my amethyst, and that was the same question I had, is like, I feel this longing, but how do I let it, how do I let it out? How do I experience it? I sense these things, but how do I like bring them forward? How do I experience them? And so I've been asked that so many times, like, I'm interested in the goddess-centered path, or I'm just interested in more mindfulness, more sacred living, more, magic or ordinary enchantment. Like, I'm interested in this, but how do I feel it? How do I feel it? And so for me, 30 Days of Goddess was the answer to create kind of basically a gentle and nurturing container to answer that question of how do I feel it? And one of the things that I do emphasize for people is it's not always a flash of, it's not always moments of flash and fire. Like, sometimes the moments are dusty and small and soft and ragged even, but the moments are always there. And so really that's why I created that offering, is to offer like a container that's simple enough, but also flexible enough, and also expansive enough to invite in all kinds of experiences, and to give you something. Okay, there we go. To give you something to come back to over and over, to give you like a base. If you have just one small moment of sacredness in the day, you know that it's there. You have an easy way to connect, an easy way to touch back down, even if the moment is small and soft and ordinary. Like, a lot of my faith, so to speak, is based in the small and soft and ordinary. It really is. And I've had those moments of flash and fire. I've had those moments of mysticism and enchantment and goddess lightning strikes of invitation, of inspiration. But my spirituality for me is formed out of those rocks and stones and moss and bones, and the small and soft and ordinary that just delights and enchants me every day. It's just a miracle. Like, there's so many tiny miracles. It's just everywhere.
Well, it's true. Well, first of all, I feel like a lot of people are looking. They're searching for something. They're searching for some meaning to their life and to the universe at large. But I have to agree with you. It's the moments every day. I mean, the moments every day, the small moments, that everything is a blade of grass is a wonder, right?
It is.
You understand scientifically, it's been told to us that, it photosynthesizes, that's the green and so forth. But, it's still, how is it there? Why does it look like that? Why does it come back all the time? I mean, these are
how amazing.
Right. It's amazing, right? And totally amazing. And if you just stop to think about it, and I know that that you have had circles, and that you had started with the baby blessings. And it was funny because when I heard that your mother and her group were doing it when you were a child, that's surprising that they had. I wonder where that, like, that intrigues me to find out, how was it that they followed that path? Where did that come from for them, especially since you weren't raised in a traditionally religious household?
Right. And also, I'd like to point out, also in Central Missouri, which isn't necessarily known as a hotbed of alternative spirituality.
Right.
So and my mom's 70 now, so her friends were all about that. They're in that same type of age. And really they were coming from the consciousness raising kind of the 1970s. That's where they were coming from. So, and they drew upon like partially influence from paganism, partially from like Native American types of ideas, even though as we, you learn know better, do better. And so as we learned, like, so they originally called the ceremonies, they had blessing ways after a Navajo tradition. And then we realized, like, we're kind of like white ladies in the Midwest, and that's not really the greatest. So we shifted to calling them mother blessing ceremonies instead, because that's what they were. They weren't blessing ways. Blessing ways are a Navajo tradition that has a specific type of framework. They were just drawing inspiration from the idea that you could ritualize, celebrate, and honor with ceremony, sisterhood, and song, that you could honor that transition for the mother and the baby. So as soon as we learned that, it wasn't cool to be borrowing from a tradition that we didn't actually belong to, we shifted our language and our approach to them as well. But so really they were coming from like that kind of consciousness raising feminist perspective, like, emerging, like kind of celebrating womanhood or our own power. That's basically the roots for them, I think, at that time period. But yes, I went to my first mother blessing in 1991, I think, which does seem like a long time ago, especially because, we have social media now, and it seems, sometimes I feel like people maybe think like this is just an idea that got introduced, 7 years ago or 5 years ago or something. But really, there have been women gathering in circles and holding rituals for each other, for 50,000 years.
Yes.
And so I do feel really fortunate to have been born into a group that honored those types of rites of passage for one another. They had a ceremony for my sister and me and all their daughters too, like a rite of passage, coming of age, maiden ceremony as well. So when I was 12, when I was 12, we all circled together. They had all their daughters come, and we all had their crowns of flowers, and they sang to us and gave us lessons but shared their wisdom about becoming strong and powerful women and all that kind of stuff. And looking back, I'm like, wow. And that was Central Missouri in the 90s. That's pretty good.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. But they didn't see any religious or spiritual aspect to that, or did they? They
did. They came from different perspectives. So some of the women would be, there would be some of the women would have more of a, like, kind of a Baha'i, like there were some women who were Baha'i. There was some women who had who had gone to like trainings with like Native American, like shaman. I hesitate to use that word too, but had gone to like, sweat lodges and like ceremonies and things like that. There were some people who came more from like a pagan or like kind of reclaiming reclaiming kind of tradition. My own mom was not religious. So she, but I wouldn't say that all the women together, there was a broad assortment of spiritual, but kind of that new agey, kind of broad, spiritual, but not religious kind of framework. And they had a women's singing group called Horizon, but spelled H-E-R, like her rising. So they had a women's singing group called Horizon, which we still sing. I still sing those songs today with my friends from that Horizon used to sing back then.
Now, why do you think your mother joined? I mean, if she wasn't religious, was she just looking for some sort of women's group? Because that would be the last thing that she would think to join.
Yeah. Well, looking for that connection, it was partial. My parents moved to this area as homesteaders to do like living off the land. They moved here from California in the 70s so they were very immersed in like kind of alternative lifestyle. I grew up in a house that was solar powered with windmills for water, and we were off the grid until the 90s, completely off the grid, like no electricity, no running water, no bathroom in the house, that kind of thing. So a lot of their friends were that type of people, back to the landers, people who'd come to this area in the 70s to homestead, to be self-sufficient, that kind of thing. So I think it's a natural outgrowth for her. She's like, oh, these are we don't, just like we don't have to live in the same kind of house that everybody else lives in. We don't have to school our kids the same way. She had home, we were all born at home and homeschooled and that kind of stuff. And so going to just like having your babies at home or not sending your kids to school, going ahead and going to a circle and having flowers on your head, like that fits right in.
Right. You just don't hear about it in Missouri. You know what I mean?
You don't hear about it in Missouri, but it's basically anything that's outside of the established systems. Like my parents were very much like, or, are still very much, they kind of rejected like the outside systems or established systems. So those types of ceremonies are stepping out of the established religious system, essentially. So it's not that, it's not they're anti-religious per se, but they're certainly not fundamentalist Christians.
Right. No, just you think that it's not something that was going on in Missouri,
Right.
Not that there was anything wrong that it was going on, but just that you wouldn't think that it was going on in Missouri at the time. And then that's just a natural outcropping of then everything else. I know that because I actually think the first time I heard your story, you were speaking at a summit. It was a weekend summit, a 3-day weekend summit. And I heard you speaking about, and I know that at the time, and that was quite a while ago, because I know you mentioned that you have 4 children and there's an age gap between them, but I think when I heard you speak, it wasn't that long after you had your second set of children, because you were doing the circles with other moms to be. I think at the same time that you were doing it. So it's quite a while ago.
Well, a lot of my my work with Brigid's Grove started with birth art. So I started making goddess figurines and doing goddess sculptures during pregnancy. And it was a way of, I started with I did needle felting with my first son. He was born in 2003. And I did needle felted goddesses at that time. And then it was after a pregnancy loss journey that I started to make goddesses in clay. And they were very much like a 3D visual representation of like my own journey, especially about reclaiming the pregnant identity, because I had gone through multiple pregnancy losses. And it was about like, how do I re-embody the pregnant woman? Like, how do I re-find this power and this trust in my body that has been shaken by death and loss and grief? Like, how do I get that? How do I reclaim that? And so I started making the figures in clay, and then I made them throughout my pregnancy. And then after that daughter was born, my rainbow baby girl, I have 3 boys and a girl. And so she was born after a lot of grief and loss for me. And after she was born, I continued to make the figures, but instead of being pregnant or nursing or whatever, I started to then she'd be holding the baby, and then the baby would be standing next to her. And then the baby would be like a little child who was a little independent figurine instead of being like attached to the mother, because these were like representations in clay of this unfolding life path, but they also speak to broader archetypes or broader experiences. And so Brigid's Grove really started with, birth art primarily. Like I primarily made pregnant and nursing and motherhood related sculptures.
Oh, so you were selling those sculptures?
Yeah, I started selling them
first, because I have to say I have your new, I guess, iterations of them, and my daughter loves them. I have to them. I have them here actually. I have to show. I have quite a few. So I have the standing ones, and they have their
yes, the story goddesses. Yes.
Right. Yes. And of course they come with cards. And of course I have another one like this. Of course she's standing, and this is the sitting one.
Oh, yes. Yes.
And so of course my daughter loves them, and she wants a set of her own.
Yes.
And of course they come with cards that explain.
Yes.
Which I think are beautiful. And you've actually created these yourself.
Yes, we have.
You can see that the shining with the back, and then each card has information. You've actually created all this system yourself, including, I know you mentioned was Womanrunes. That was the name of your book. So you also
Womanrunes, yes.
Womanrunes. So that, I know you also have that. So you created that system, but you have this too, which is wonderful. Actually, this is also from your shop.
Oh,
it's the Tree of Life, laser cut Tree of Life with the almost like a I always call it, I know it's like a rainbow effect when the light.
Yes, like an electroplating.
Yes, but it's like a rainbow effect that it hits almost like a sheen on it with different colors. So, but so you went from the clay to, because these are lovely, and these of course are readily available to purchase. You have a shop actually. I know you have many other items there, including the journals that people can use.
Yes.
But you went from the clay to this, and do you still work in clay?
Not usually, no. And that because basically I realized I'd started to make these things, and I realized how I'm like, this can only ever be so big because it's so labor intensive to make them. So we started to look into casting, to doing the casting of the work. So I make the originals, and then we make a silicone
Uh-oh.
And,
Yeah.
but that was that turning point where people started to say, don't have anything that's not pregnant. It's kind of mirrors that experience of my own experience with ritual. Like, can't we have rituals when we're not pregnant? And people would start to say, like, do you have any goddesses that are like just goddesses? And at the time, I was still pretty immersed in birth work. I was a childbirth educator, I was a postpartum doula, I had a prenatal fitness educator, like I did all that kind of stuff. And I was still really rooted in that framework. And I was like worried, like, oh, but if I make too many goddessy things, like if it's too goddessy, like I got to stick to birth art because that's almost like safer. It doesn't like threaten anybody because it's just birth art. And if I start calling them goddesses and I start making goddesses, like, is somebody going to show up and, whatever, burn crosses on my lawn or something like that. And so I was concerned about branching out into goddesses and away from birth art. But I'm so glad I did, because it just really, like, there's so much more for me out there than staying in the little box of doing birth only. And the story goddesses that you held up, they came from that need or that desire to still offer some customization. Because when I was making them by hand, I would do things. People would say, can I have sunflowers on it? So then I would put sunflowers on it. And we were thinking, like, how can we still make these customizable, but without having to start from scratch every time? And so the little belt idea came from that. Like, so the little belt can have the different stone, it can have the different charm, the goddess can be the different colors. So there's still like infinite potential here, but without quite so much intensive labor on my part.
And you also offer the charms, because I purchased the charms. You also offer small charms.
Yes.
That people can carry in their own personal bag and so forth. So that is right. It's like you can interchange what you want to carry, really, to have to hold with you, to keep present at the moment. So,
and really,
go ahead.
Oh, really meant to be like a portable devotional item. Like they can slip in your pocket. They're very sturdy. You can carry them with you, and they can be kind of like a touchstone. I see people send me pictures sometimes, like they're nurses at the hospital, and they'll have like a little goddess like standing on there where they do their charting, and she'll be standing there, or they'll keep her in their scrubs pocket or whatever. They're like this. They form this kind of portable touchstone with the sacred, kind of wherever you go. And that's important to me, to have things, devotional items that you can actually like touch and use and experience and explore, instead of just something you set on the shelf and then, just dust it occasionally.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I love that idea, especially the tiny little charms, the different charms, because you carry your devotional at the moment.
Exactly.
Interchange. Yes. And and I know, of course, you also offer the journaling, because that's part of the program. But so your shop is actually called Brigid's Grove.
Yes.
But then you also have a facility where you have the circles and so forth. That's also Brigid's Grove, correct? You have that as well.
So we have a studio building. So Brigid's Grove is the name of our Etsy shop, and then we have a studio building. It's in the yard, or in the
right on your property, right?
Yes, right on our property. I usually actually hold my circles at a different building, like a lodge kind of building that belongs to my mom, that's down the road from me, and so that's usually where I hold events.
And you're still doing that? You're still doing that regularly? You still do that regularly?
Yes. Yeah. 2020 put a little crimp in my face-to-face experiences. But right now I'm organizing things. They're relatively spontaneous. So I was doing, faithfully every month on the second Friday, we would get together and I would have a circle. And now I'm kind of going back to that seasonal thing. So we had a winter or a spring equinox ritual. We had a summer solstice ceremony, and then we'll be doing a fall and winter celebration this year as well. Those are in person with people.
So now, do you? I know, being a therapist, and I had I'm in New York in the lockdown, no one was going anywhere, so all of my people were completely online, and then some have come back. But I don't know how it will work in the future. I mean, do you see, those years of festivals, and I've attended a lot, and you had the daily ones and you had weekend ones, and sometimes summer ones that last 4 or 5 days. Do you see that any of that may come back at a time? I mean, do you?
Yeah,
you were doing once a month. Well, you actually did the red tent also, correct? You were doing once a month red tents. So do you see that
Yeah.
may come back?
I hope so. I do feel like those threads of interpersonal connection have kind of thinned. Like we talk about, you weave your web of connection, and essentially, I feel like in many ways people have kind of let go of some of those threads of connection, and I am finding it hard for myself too to like rebuild some of that, to reconnect the threads. And part of it's like my own motivation. I'm like, well, it actually took a lot out of me to do once a month and to always be holding that space, and my circles had gotten pretty big. And so I had quite a few people coming again in Central Missouri. They come from all over if they know that it's out there. And so having a break allowed me to clarify where I needed to pull some of my energy back and to not quite commit quite so much, and to simplify what I was offering. And but again, I do feel that like kind of that tug in my heart of, I used to do so many more in-person events, and I used to nurture that in-person community so much more than I have now. And I've gotten kind of out of the habit of it. And those threads, they take time and tending and nurturing and care to reweave. So I've been working intentionally this year to reweave that. I do have I'm doing my quarterly seasonal retreats. That's where I decided to start. I'm like, this is kind of back to the roots. That's kind of back to the roots. That's what I started with back in 2007 or 2008, was quarterly retreats. So now here, as I emerge back into the world again, I'm like, well, that's what I know I can commit to. I can recommit to these quarterly retreats. But I do also have a small circle that also still meets once a month, and we took 2020 off, but then we started meeting in 2021 and have kept going. That's just a couple of friends and me. And so we still meet regularly every month and have a circle. And we've been doing, we basically only took that little break of 2020 where we didn't meet. And so we still meet every month, or sometimes twice a month.
I mean, I'm like caught between a rock and a hard place. And I think about it all the time as we used to attend a shaman circle, my daughter and I think once a month. And we did that for quite a number of years. And she started young. She's the one who insisted, I have to say, that, and I was remiss as a mom, because I was doing a lot of things. We were attending a lot of different activities. I was running a full-time wellness center, and she kept asking me, she was 12, and she kept asking me if she could go to this shaman circle. And I said I would take her, but I really wasn't taking her. And then one day, I think she was 13 by then, she says, if you don't take me, I'm driving myself. And it was about 30 minutes away. So we started going, and we attended for quite a number of years. And we do miss that, we miss, meeting up with the same people and having that circle and all. But I often wonder, because I also have connection now through online with people from all over the world, and that we're meeting on a regular basis. And then I'm almost fearful that you might lose that connection as well with those people. But how do you physically, like the other day I saw, and I was quite surprised, they just had I think it was the Goddess Festival in Glastonbury in England. And I was really surprised at how many people. It was a sea of people. It looked like an entire city had been formed in the mountains there. So people are gathering again, but how do you separate from those that you were in contact with from other areas?
And that is one of the things about online circles, is like, these are people that you would never see in real life, and yet look at the web of connection we make with them too. And also there's a little bit of an element of, it's simpler. I don't have to tote tubs of red fabric. I don't have to take food. You can just tune in on Zoom for your hour, and you can have really fulfilling experiences. And before the pandemic experience, I was really averse to online circles. I thought there's nothing like a real fire and hand-to-hand connection and actual real life hugs and sitting down to your dinner together. Like, nothing can replace that. And I still think there's extreme amounts of power in hand-to-hand connection and face-to-face, but in reaching out and realizing like that, and dabbling. It took me a long time to dabble successfully with having an online circle, because I was averse to it. I thought, this doesn't count. It's not real. And the truth is, it is real, and it does count, and it can be very fulfilling and very nurturing. And I don't want to let that go. And I do a monthly online circle, and I don't want to let that go, because there's people who come that I'll never meet in person. And that still fills a need for them, and it's rewarding and nurturing and enriching, and it actually takes less out of me, energetically speaking, than doing an in-person circle does. But and it has a wider impact because it ripples out to all these people in all these places. It's not just Central Missouri, it's everybody.
Yeah.
So that's really great. But I do think people have gotten out of the habit of doing things in person. And because there's some messiness to face-to-face connection, it's kind of nice to almost sidestep that a little bit. And you're like, oh, it's kind of cleaner and safer and easier almost online. And so I think it takes some courage to step back into the face-to-face and to remember that those messy imperfections, like there's beauty there too in the messy imperfections of hand to hand and face to face. And so we're doing, I'm the keynote speaker for Gaia Goddess Gathering this year, which
wonderful.
Will have taken place. It will actually have taken place before this interview eventually airs, but it is, and so that is going to be my first, like, full immersion back into a face-to-face festival. I'm doing a workshop and I'm doing the keynote there. And I'm interested to see, I'm curious to see how many people will come and what it will be like, because there's been this break and there's been this separation, and it can take real effort and courage and fortitude to step back out and to rebuild the web or to reconnect the threads. It really can. And I don't know how, I think the size will be impacted. The amount of people that will come is going to be impacted still by people just basically not being in the habit anymore. They've let it go.
Well, I attended, not that I feel like you, I should say that. I felt that in person was always best because there was connection. And I was quite surprised that the groups that I have been involved with online, maybe because you see the person, but there still is a little bit of anonymity because that person's so far away, but it appears that their information, their sharing is much deeper.
Yes.
I found in person.
I've experienced that too.
Yeah. But I attended, it was the Women in Mythology symposium. And I attended, it was not that, it was in New York. It was hours from me, but it was not that, it wasn't that difficult to do. So I attended it, and I was surprised because prior to the pandemic, there were a lot of people, and I hadn't gone before. And the other people said that there were so many people that attended, and this year it wasn't that many, but hopefully people are getting back involved in attending these things. So we hope.
Yes. Well, and that's one of the things I find about online work too, is there is a certain amount of baggage that comes with the in-person if you have other relationships with each other, so like my friends who come to Circle, like we've been in play groups together, we've done homeschool co-ops together, and whatever, birthday parties, etc. And so sometimes that comes with like a layer of baggage or almost like preconceived notions, like, and almost puts a weight on of, I don't want to be silly, or I don't want to be too vulnerable because we have this interaction in other settings. So it can be hard to let your hair down, so to speak, in the in-person group compared to online, where online really allows like a level of authenticity and depth that surprised me. Once I finally opened myself up to it, I was like, wow, you can really find a lot of power and connection and depth here. And you don't get sidetracked by stuff like whatever, people having to go to the bathroom or put the soup on or get the salad ready, or just having like little small, I've dealt with in in-person circles, people will have interpersonal conflicts with each other, like outside of the group, or even conflicts between their kids. And then so-and-so doesn't want to come anymore if so-and-so is going to be there. And there's like this in-group sort of division that can happen sometimes that I still think is worth working through. I think it's worth working through. It's not, it doesn't make me want to throw up my hands and give up forever. It's still worth working through. But then you're like, but online, like all that level of baggage is removed, and you only have the authentic depth of connection, and you're kind of a fresh slate for one another too. Like you're a fresh slate. There's not that layer of baggage that can come with the in-person
That's
stuff.
True. Yeah, I agree. And that's why I think that because all of that is there, they can be a little bit maybe more honest, more genuine, more open, because it's almost anonymous to it.
There's nothing to prove.
Yeah. it's almost anonymous. And as far as being perhaps being judged, although no one should be judging anyway, but human nature, sometimes it does happen.
Yes.
But where do you see yourself going from here, since all of this, the pause that occurred and now starting to get back? And how do you see, because you mentioned you're doing you're doing like a small weekend gathering. Is that what you're doing? Small, like quarterly gatherings or weekend?
Yeah, I'm doing like a quarterly just on a Saturday. So I do
just
quarterly
one day.
just on a Saturday. Yes, just on a Saturday. And then I do monthly that's just with a small group of friends, and that's just for a couple hours in we meet from like 11 to 3 on just on a day. And so what I'm looking forward to and what I hope to get going is I would love to do an in-person art journaling with 30 Days of Goddess. Like I'd love to do in person. I'm thinking of it being like an art and soul, so we sing, we work on it. So I have like I have the little prayer books, so we sing together, have a little bit of a community check-in, work on the prayer books together, do or other art journaling type things, sing again, boom, we're done. Like not a lot of preparation involved, not a lot of responsibility as far as like toting supplies and stuff. So I'm looking for like the right place essentially to do that. But that's what I'd like to do in person moving forward, is an art and soul type of get together that's basically singing and working in our prayer books. Yeah,
this sounds wonderful. Wonderful. It says it's too bad I'm so far away, because that's the issue with all of the art, that I use a lot of art, creative expressive arts with clients and in groups. And it's, of course, it's easier on the one hand. I don't have to carry everything. I was carrying so much with me, but on the other hand, you can't really necessarily, I mean, you can have conversation and engage to some extent, but then everybody has to have their own supplies. It's a little bit difficult to do all of that online. So, but Missouri's too far away for me to attend.
Yes, that's right. But that's what I'd like to do as far as in person, like kind of keep it low key, because I do realize there's an energetic drain to like holding space for kind of too many people for too much stuff. And so keeping it simple, and then the seasonal retreats is what I'm planning to continue doing. And then I do an online circle that I just call Simple and Sacred, that's part of 30 Days of Goddess in my Patreon. And so that feels like a good balance too, like a one online circle a month, one in-person circle a month. That feels good to me. And that feels like I can still priestess to my community, but also extend those threads of connection out to other people in all of their locations and all of their places. And hopefully still kind of meet multiple needs in one without draining too much of myself.
Yes. I have to agree. I mean, that sounds like the best plan, right? The best of both worlds. And servicing, like you said, priestessing to the population, really.
Yeah, exactly.
In all possible avenues that you can get to. But I want to thank you so much for coming on today. I definitely want to put your information in the description, especially the shop, because you have such lovely things. And I'm sure that my audience is going to ask about the goddesses with the cards. And I want to put the information about the 30 Day of Goddess. And I know you have Patreon as well. And I know today people can join Patreon because you do have a more extensive group in there.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah.
So I definitely will do that. And I hope that we get to chat again. Soon. And I thank you. And I thank you for persevering with all of our technical issues. I almost I couldn't get up after I turned off everything. I was panicking. I couldn't get back up. So, but we did it. We did it today. And I thank you for taking such time out of your day. So
thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to connecting in the future. And I would like to say, yes, if people go to 30daysofgoddess.com, that's the easiest way to get started. There's links to everything else there, and there's free card decks to download, and there's we have monthly newsletter, and there's all kinds of stuff, and you can pretty much get anything else that I do, you can from 30daysofgoddess.com. So that's a great way to.
Yeah, so I will definitely link that in the description. Thank you again so much, Molly. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.